So we are Rank the Vote, national organization. You know what we're going to talk about. How ranked choice voting is a viable, impactful fix for what ails our politics today and how you can join us to make history. Here are a little bit of an overview of what we're going to cover. The big problems with politics and voting, how ranked choice voting solves these problems, many more benefits of ranked choice voting you might not know about, the national movement to advance ranked choice voting and its progress to date, and of course, how you can help us, how you can link up with us and organize with us and also contribute funds if you're able to advance this amazing campaign. So basic problem is pretty self-evident. I think that this picture, this is the incursion into the US Capitol, which is the kind of thing that you'd expect in more of a banana republic, not the American Republic, is an epitome of how low our politics of division have brought us. So how did we get here? A lot of folks are saying we're in a sort of political death spiral. Lee Drutman, the analyst from New America, calls it a two-party doom loop. The Constitution is supposed to create a system that promotes stability and unity and consensus based on this idea of checks and balances from the three branches. But we're all seeing it play out painfully on the national news every day in our newspapers. Our elected leaders are so divided, brinksmanship is the norm and pragmatism is the exception. We have major problems in this country and in our world. The problem of deindustrialization and loss of jobs, all sorts of injustices that we're trying to remedy from our sordid history socially, climate change, the threat of climate change and massive weather changes. But policy action on these big opportunities is effectively frozen, which leads to more crises, more inflamed passions, more finger pointing and division. And one would think that our elections are this saving grace, this corrective mechanism, this backstop that keeps the government accountable and on the right track. If a legislator is going sideways or not really performing or producing, we have the power to unseat them, get someone in that office that's better and more representative of real issues and what we care about. But that very mechanism of elections are feeding the same problem. It's failing to provide this corrective function. It's feeding the cycle of negative partisanship and gridlock, which leads to more frustration, more finger pointing, and it makes the bad crises even worse. We're in a spiral. And we all see this play out in very contentious primaries that rewards, in many cases, extremists from rising to power and getting traction. We assert that it's our plurality election system, the system that only requires someone to win the largest slice or tribe, not the majority, that is the root cause of our political crisis today. And it can't be captured any better than in the 2016 Republican presidential primary. If you all recall, we had a very crowded field. And when you look at these vote numbers in some of these early states, such as the New Hampshire GOP primary, that's where these numbers are from, you'll see that the majority was so split that it allowed a person like Donald Trump to consolidate one passionate base and squeak by winning these early Republican primaries with 35 to 40 to 45% of the vote, because there were too many other options for the majority. And someone that's more of a kind of someone more on a wing of the party who's not necessarily in the center can take advantage of that and start to build momentum and traction. He started off as kind of a joke, actually, if you remember, and he became very much electable based on those early wins with very small percentages. One of the classic cases, so what I presented just before was the problem of the crowded field dilemma. and someone who can win with a minority or a non-majority and come out on top. And this is the dilemma of the spoiler. This is the classic case of the spoiler in 2000 in Florida, where you had the Democrat Al Gore, the Republican George Bush, and the Green Party candidate Ralph Nader. And if you recall here, the two frontrunners had a tiny, tiny vote difference of 537 votes. Nader, the Green Party candidate, had nearly 100,000 votes. And when you look at exit polls of the Nader voters, many, many more of them would have gone to Gore had Nader not been in the race. But we all know what happened. Nader stayed in the race. And by staying in the race, even though he's the least popular candidate in the election, he has the ultimate power to literally decide the winner of that election. If he stepped out, as some of these third parties or independents do for the sake of ensuring the majority gets the right result, then they allow those votes to reconsolidate for those voters, backup choice. But he stayed in, and that meant he split the vote from the majority and allowed George Bush to win, which is kind of a paradox. And this is a very, very fundamental flaw, a design flaw in our plurality voting system. It works really, really well when there are two candidates, but the minute you add a third or more, it breaks down. Similar dynamic, folks argue, was at play in the presidential election of 1992. You had George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and the reform independent businessman Ross Perot. A lot of folks argue that Perot really fatally split the vote from George H.W. Bush in that election and allowed Bill Clinton to win with only 43% of the popular vote. Now we're going to dive into a local example. When you start seeing the way that plurality voting fails you, you're going to start seeing examples like this in your states and cities and towns. This was the working class city of Fall River, Massachusetts. The mayor, Giselle Correa, was just indicted on charges of investment fraud. Naturally, the people of Fall River rose up and put on a recall petition to vote him out. And when those voters flipped over the ballot, they vote on the mayor's replacement. But in a quirk of the charter of Fall River, the charter allowed the very person being recalled to run again as one of the replacement candidates, which seems like it shouldn't be a big deal, right? Because he was just, nearly a supermajority wanted him out and voted him out. But what's funny is he didn't just have one reform, anti-corruption minded challenger. He didn't have two. He didn't have three. He had four. And because he had four, while those four, when you combine their votes, were 65% of voters' will, which is very similar to the 61% who voted to recall Correa. Correa was actually the front runner and won in the same election he was recalled. Now, if that isn't the epitome of a voting system that does the exact opposite of what voters intend, I don't know what is. When you start looking, it's like when you buy a VW Beetle, you start seeing them all over the roads. And when you start seeing how our voting system fails us, and you do a more of a systemic analysis, you'll see that it happens all the time. We did a study in Massachusetts alone, which you'll find similar results in your states. The last 20 years, for candidate races that have three or more who run, these are the numbers by which people win without a majority, which is symptomatic of spoilers, vote splitting, and paradoxical results. So we have this sordid ritual in our country of blaming candidates who want to run and voters who want to vote for candidates who are not front runners or the largest fundraisers or the party darlings or the most networked. We call them spoilers, but it's the system that's the spoiler. The system fails us. It thwarts majority rule. It helps divisive candidates succeed in crowded fields. It fails to eliminate this very intractable spoiler effect. It limits honest choice of all voters in the voting booth, and it distracts us from healthy issue-based campaigns. Instead, people are talking about clearing the field in the horse race and who's the most electable and who's going to thwart the results. So I think the solution is not a surprise. Voila, it's ranked choice voting. We all know that. And excitedly, it has been getting a lot more traction in the national news. So the moment is now. The moment is now to move this, particularly because of the amazing pioneers in the state of Maine, really launching this onto the national stage. After Maine passed ranked choice voting in 2016, the New York Times endorsed. You see a few years later here, CNBC did a feature. The Washington Post endorsed. Some really great articles came out. We're still seeing the residual effects, and it's inspired other places like New York City to pass it. And a great way to introduce someone who's new to the concept is say, hey, raise your hand if you have a phone that looks like this in your pocket. The old pea green screen, old school cell phone. Nobody does. Instead, we've upgraded our technology to something like a smartphone, a little computer that does a lot more, 100 times more. Why are we using ballots that look like this? They're old and primitive, they're outmoded, and it's time for a ballot that's more expressive of the reality by which we see the world and evaluate multiple choices. This is our pick one plurality ballot. I like to call it the pick one and pray system. With ranked choice voting, it's not this radical overhaul. It's simply an addendum or an amendment to this existing ballot. That's what I like about it. It's actually an easy tweak. Instead of just one column, you add a few more columns to it. And you give people the power of backup choices. So if your favorite can't win, your vote instantly counts to your next available choice. That's a nice quick elevator pitch that you all can use when explaining it to others. But one of my favorite features here that people sometimes get wrong, they always ask, do you have to rank all of them? And the answer is no. You are free as a voter to rank as many or as few as you like. So if you're a voter who's been voting the same way for 40 years and you don't want to change, you can still simply vote your first choice and pretend it's an old school plurality ballot. But you have the opportunity to add more expression, choice, and power to your vote by ranking additional candidates should your favorite not be able to win the race. So there's something in it for everyone. And to win under this system, a candidate must get 50% plus one vote or more. And they either get this in the first round of the instant runoff or later on in the runoff when the first candidate hits that threshold or goes over that threshold. And the way we count ranked choice voting is very simple. But let's just highlight the key benefit. It gives every voter honesty, gives them honest expression and true choice. And it gives all voters the most broadly supported candidate who also has the most depth of support, that intersection that's most suitable for governing. And I can't imagine what's more American than that. So let's get into how we count it. Very, very simple, instant runoff. So a lot of folks are familiar with the 2-round runoff. So it's a relatable concept. This is not new or exotic. It's the same thing, except it's done in a smarter way in one single election, not two, where you have to make voters come out for 2 rounds, and you also have to spend taxpayer money to hold 2 elections. It's done in one. And it's done by first determining from first choice votes, does any candidate have a majority? And if so, they win the election. You don't look at the rankings and you're done. But where ranked choice voting is so critical is when you have this split field and multiple strong candidates, where it's impossible to determine from first choice votes who the majority really wants to rally around. And that's where you go into an instant runoff. And it's a simple series of eliminations, vote transfers, and then checking to see the first candidate to hit that 50% threshold is the winner. So in this first round, we're counting the first choice votes here. We have 2 orange candidates and 2 purple candidates. We have no majority winner. So we eliminate weak orange. That 5% of voters, most of them are orangey. So most of their second choices on their ballot, now that their favorite's eliminated, in our example, are going to strong orange. So strong orange picks up another 4% from those voters. Strong purple picks up another 1%. Does any candidate have a majority yet? The answer is no. No one's hit 50%. So we just do the exact same thing we just did instantly. And we eliminate weak purple. And now those voters who voted weak purple have their next ranking counted instead. So their vote is never wasted. It's never thrown away. And everyone's voice is always heard. In our third instant runoff round, we do have a winner. We have someone who's hit over 50%. That is strong purple. Now, in old school plurality voting, who would have won? Strong orange. But when you look at the combined votes of this purple candidate block, you'll see that the true sentiment was 55% wanting to move in a purple direction. In plurality voting, that sentiment gets buried. But in ranked choice voting, that sentiment is allowed to reconsolidate and emerge. And one of the earliest high-profile examples of ranked choice voting in action was the congressional race in Maine's 2nd congressional district in 2018. We had an incumbent Republican, Bruce Poliquin, a challenger Democrat, Jared Golden, and 2 independent candidates. Now, no candidate hit a majority. So what do we do with ranked choice voting? It's not over. Even though Poliquin's in the lead, those independent voters, their votes are not thrown away. They can safely vote independent for the first time ever because they have the power of backup choices. And while Poliquin was the front runner in the beginning, it just so happened that actually the majority of voters who participated really leaned toward Golden, and Golden was able to get over the majority threshold and win. So ranked choice voting allowed that true majority sentiment to emerge. Incidentally, Bruce Poliquin challenged the results in federal court, which I think is logical. And he tried to get the system thrown out. And the judge was a Trump appointee. And the judge said, your arguments are invalid and ranked choice voting stands. One challenge was it violates one person, one vote. But because there's only one active vote at a time, ranked choice voting absolutely satisfies the one person, one vote principle. So as I mentioned before, in these crowded local elections, this was a mayoral election in Boston, you can determine that winner in one high stakes round, which also allows fresh candidates to run without spending a lot of time and money on their election. It shortens the campaign season because they only have to deal with that one election. And it improves voter turnout, which we're going to get to in a minute. And of course, saves taxpayer dollars. It also, when you really step back and think, what if we had ranked choice voting in some high stakes races? If you all remember in 2016, the Hillary-Trump contention was incredibly high, incredibly toxic. And if we had a moderating influence of an independent running in that race, that could have really changed the tone and tenor of that election season. Bernie Sanders, as we all recall, has actually been an independent most of his political career, but he kind of was forced to run as a Democrat because of our plurality voting system. If he ran as an independent, he certainly would have split the vote, mostly from Hillary Clinton, many analysts have thought about. And that would have been committing political suicide, just like Ralph Nader did in 2000. So he didn't dare do that. And so that means that he can't be as honest as he should and really represent that honest faction. And a lot of other candidates who wanted to run as independents either run candidates and they get really blamed and shut out and drop out very quickly, or they just don't run at all. And so you don't have new voices entering our elections. So some more benefits that you might not know right off the bat. Negative campaigning. It deals with negative campaigning in a very, very elegant way, which we're going to talk about. So Betsy Hodges was the former mayor of Minneapolis. She observed that there was very little attacking and elbowing among candidates because they were vying to be one another's second choices on their opponent's supporters. Very interesting. Why does this happen? Under plurality voting, if I'm knocking on doors in the field trying to get support for candidate purple, and I come to a house that has a sign for candidate orange, what is the strategic thing for me to do? It's actually just to skip that house. I don't deal with that voter at all. I focus just on my base and a tiny narrow slice of swing voters. But with ranked choice voting, the dynamics completely change. As a purple supporter, I actually go to the door. I actually have a conversation with that orange supporter, and I appeal to a common interest and try to earn their second or third choice vote. I find something that we have in common, like strong environmental record or a marriage equality record or whatever the issue is. And the one thing that I don't do is mudsling against candidate orange, because I'm going to alienate that voter and turn them off, and they're not going to rank me on their ballot at all. So I've never seen, I don't know about you all, but I've never seen a reform that so elegantly infuses an incentive to stay positive and stick to the issues as a formula for success in campaigning. That's one of my favorite features about ranked choice voting. And it makes me think about when folks can't campaign in a more consensus-driven way where they reach across the aisle to earn support. It sounds a little bit more like the way that we should be governing, doesn't it? And so shouldn't campaigning be a little bit more like governing? And scholars have observed that voters are consistently reporting this less negativity. This is objective observations and sentiment analysis in direct polling of voters in the cities that use ranked choice voting. You're also seeing a 10-point increase in voter turnout on average when you compare RCV to primaries and traditional runoffs. This was a comprehensive study done in 2016 across 26 American cities and 79 ranked choice voting elections. It's pretty remarkable what they found. They also debunked the myth that ranked choice voting is hard for voters and they make errors on their ballots. It actually found that there's no statistically significant difference in error rates on RCV ballots versus plurality ballots. Voters use the rankings immediately. In their first ever election in Maine and in Santa Fe, nearly 90% of voters ranked more than one. They start taking advantage of this new power. In Santa Fe, 61% ranked all the choices on their ballot. And to me, that's very intriguing. It implies that ranked choice voting also creates an incentive for voters to engage more deeply in the process. Ranked choice voting has been shown to have statistically significant and causal impact on the numbers of folks of color running and winning office in the Bay Area. It's somewhat preliminary, but it's very promising, and it's based on 249 elections, RCV elections, compared to 270 control city elections. On average, ranked choice voting cities have 49% of women as a proportion on their city councils, compared to 25%, which is the national average. It's double the national average for women's representation. So ranked choice voting clearly is beginning to transform politics across the country. And it's doing that in a really remarkable way. 2 states, the first states in US history to adopt full statewide campaign for federal and state offices are happening. We're at the cusp of a turning point. Maine and Alaska. New York City, just after Maine did it, voted 74% to use ranked choice voting in local elections. And this year, we're going to see it used for a very crowded field for mayor. Now, when you zoom out, many of you might not know this, but ranked choice voting has been used or enacted on some level for real political elections in 26 states across the country, including 5 states for military and overseas voters. And it's also been used for over 100 years in both Australia and Ireland, and many decades in Canada, Scotland, India, and New Zealand. Most of these for national elections. And even in the private sector for professional organizations, for the Oscars use ranked choice voting to select the best picture, the Heisman Trophy in college athletics, and also many colleges and universities, over 50 around the country, for student and faculty elections. So, most exciting part I want to talk to you about is our national campaign. And this is the moment many of you have been waiting for. Hopefully you learned a couple new tidbits on talking points, but let's get into how we're going to make this happen and accelerate the rate at which we're getting ranked choice voting adopted. Because it's one thing to pass it in a bunch of cities, and it's in about 30 cities. It's a whole other animal to pass it at scale in states. And when you do it in states, that's where you really get that inflection point of major national news coverage. And that's what Rank the Vote eventually wants to help happen. But before we do that, we have to bridge an important gap that still exists. That gap is that there's a lot of supporters of ranked choice voting out there. The problem is they're not as politically connected as folks involved in a lot of other bread and butter human interest issues. Ranked choice voting has been historically seen as a bit more of a dry, kind of nerdy, wonky subject, more mechanical. It's more of like the engineering of the ballot. We're trying to change that. Our goal is to bring ranked choice voting out of the nerd stream and into the mainstream by meeting these activists exactly where they are, aggressively and comprehensively closing this gap by bringing them together, coaching them, and co-founding brand new ranked choice voting organizations all over the country and preparing them when they're ready to bring on a massive wave of political legal enactments in the coming 4 to 6 years. And so we're laying very important early seed stage groundwork right now. We set a goal for last year. We started in January 2020. That's when we were founded. We set a goal to have 12 new state groups up and running. We blew past that goal and hit 17 states, exceeding our goal by 40%. By the end of this summer, we hope to have launched and start mentoring the remaining 36 states that have no mature ranked choice voting infrastructure and get these groups to start building power. Now, how do we help them build power? We start by teaching them a lot of important political organizing techniques in our 20-page playbook that we built based on building the largest statewide movement for ranked choice voting in the country in Massachusetts, which is what our founding team did before we started Rank the Vote. We're exporting our techniques to these other states and really giving them a comprehensive and very intensive handholding on leadership development, delegation, and high-scale capacity growth. And one quote of support from Fair Vote Illinois, one of our affiliates that we work with, was Andrew Silva, who runs the group. He said, "It probably goes without saying, but you're accelerating the movement in Illinois by a ridiculous amount. It's just so valuable to skip over some of the learning speed bumps, and you've done this before, and we don't want to invent the wheel for anything that you already found works. So we're saving a lot of people time and energy by giving them working techniques right away." And how do we do it? We break things down in a really, really elemental and elementary way for these activists. We teach them simply to grow capacity. We teach them to build the list, get those emails and phones on that list, raise grassroots dollars from in the state, from as many regular folks as they can, and then train speakers to give a powerful slideshow about ranked choice voting like this one, and gather endorsements from allied organizations that might not know much about the issue and need the education. And then they report their progress to their own membership and to our national seat every month. So we've got some really promising early numbers from our early cohort. We got our first seed grant at Rank the Vote National in September. And as you see right from that point, we started getting some good linear growth of cumulative signups all over the country. So we're building a national, basically a distributed national list to build a true infrastructure for this issue. We're teaching these states to have really exciting high turnout launch meetings and raising money immediately from attendees. And it's working really, really well. We have matching donors putting up incentives, and people get really excited when we hit big room goals for fundraising. But we're also spotting some early opportunities. So if folks are interested in, like, we really want to start passing a bill soon or a ballot measure, there's 4 states that we would highlight: Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware. We're happy to share this slide or the slideshow afterward. You guys can dig into some of these details. So Rank the Vote is going big. Our mission is to make ranked choice voting the definitive voting method up and down the ticket for all political elections throughout the country. We're steadily preparing every available state and territory to become campaign ready. We absolutely cannot achieve this ambitious vision without your help. So I'm going to ask you folks to talk a bit in discussion, ask some questions, but most importantly, take action.